The fan favorite, played by Joshua Richards, was enslaved on Ray, Joe Absalom, and Celia Daniels, Jay Griffiths' farm for months and was forced to live and work in squalor. He faced numerous forms of abuse and even had one of the other victims die in his arms. Bear eventually left the farmhouse, tracking down Ray and throttling him. His son Paddy Dingle, Dominic Brunt, and Dylan Penders, Fred Kettle, were present at the time of the crime and helped to bundle Ray's corpse into the back of Jai Sharma's, Chris Bisson, van. Coronation Street confirm what happened to Mal as fan favorite makes shock confession. Love Island All-Stars winners spark fury as viewers all say same thing. They then decided to keep Bear hidden from public view in a bid to keep the dark secret under wraps. He later confessed everything to a therapist and has since been bailed by the police, but continues to struggle with what he did. After a conversation with Ray's former partner Laurel Thomas, Charlotte Bellamy, he returned home and smashed a mirror, cutting his hand. During Friday's episode, Bear arrived at the hospital and demanded treatment. The nurse assured him that he would get care as soon as possible, but he'd have to wait. He grew increasingly impatient, and student Dr. Jacob Gallagher, Joe Warrenplant, pulled him into a side room to try and give some immediate care to his hand. Bear began to panic and grabbed Jacob from behind, effectively dealing a wrestling tackle. Jacob fell to the ground in agony as the hospital security guard ushered Bear into a side room. Paddy and wife Mandy Dingle, Lisa Riley, entered the hospital and heard that a psychiatric team had been called. As they discussed what would be in their dad's best interests, they discovered he'd gone missing. On a dark road outside the hospital, Bear walked beside the line of traffic. Where is he heading, and will he be okay? Spoilers for next week have confirmed that Paddy is distraught, having spent the night fruitlessly searching for Bear. Soon things get worse for Paddy and Dylan when D.S. Walsh, Amanda Ryan, calls round as a result of Bear breaching his bail and assaulting Jacob in the hospital. He'll be held on remand when he's found. A concerned Paddy finally finds his Bear in a bad way next to Anya Barisha, Alia Al-Shabibi, now empty grave site, and coaxes his dad back to his car. Paddy knows he needs to inform D.S. Walsh. However, he thinks he can avoid Bear's immediate imprisonment by paying for him to stay at a secure mental health unit. BT, will the plan work? For months, Bear had been held captive by Ray and Celia Daniels. What began as a misguided attempt to help someone he believed was in trouble had turned into a living nightmare. Locked in outbuildings, forced to work from dawn until darkness, denied basic dignity. He had slept on damp straw, eaten scraps, and listened to the quiet sobbing of others who had been trapped there before him. One of them, Mal, had died in his arms. Bear still felt the weight of that moment. The way Mal's breath had rattled and faded. The way the silence afterward felt heavier than any wrestling opponent he had ever faced. He hadn't been able to save him. That was the beginning of the end. When Bear finally escaped the farmhouse, he hadn't gone to the police. He hadn't gone home. He had tracked Ray down. It was instinct. Rage. Something primal. Ray had tried to run. Bear remembered the look in his eyes. Shock first, then fear. They had grappled in the yard, boots scraping gravel, fists flying. Paddy had arrived mid-chaos, horror written across his face. "Dad, stop." Paddy had shouted, but Bear hadn't heard him. He had felt his hands around Ray's throat. Felt the fight drain out of him. And then there had been stillness. Too still. Dylan had stood frozen nearby. Paddy had checked Ray's pulse, hands shaking. There wasn't one. The panic that followed blurred together. The decision made in hushed voices, the body bundled into the back of Jai Sharma's van while the village slept, the weight of what they had done pressing down on all three of them. They told themselves it was justice. They told themselves Ray deserved it. They told themselves Bear had snapped because of what had been done to him. But none of that stopped the nightmares. They had hidden Bear away, kept him out of sight, kept the secret close. Bear had eventually confessed everything to a therapist, every detail of the farm, the abuse, the killing. The police had arrested him, but granted bail while investigations continued. There were questions about self-defense, about diminished responsibility, about the horrors he'd endured. But bail came with conditions, and Bear was already teetering on the edge. The conversation with Laurel had been the spark. Laurel had loved Ray once. Even after everything, there had been history between them. Pain, confusion, grief. When Bear had gone to see her, he hadn't known what he wanted. Forgiveness, maybe. Laurel had looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "You think killing him fixes what he did?" she'd asked quietly. Bear had no answer. When he returned home, the pressure inside him had finally exploded. He had stared at his reflection in the hallway mirror, the scarred face, the haunted eyes, and he hadn't recognized the man looking back. He had smashed the glass with his fist. Blood had spilled down his knuckles. Patty had rushed in, shouting, but Bear had already grabbed his coat. "I need air," he'd muttered. What he needed was something far more complicated than air. At the hospital, the fluorescent lights felt oppressive. The nurse behind the desk spoke calmly. "We'll get to you as soon as possible, sir. There's a bit of a wait." A wait. Bear couldn't handle waiting. Every second sitting in that chair felt like being locked back in that barn. Like hearing Mal's breath fade again. Like Ray's face turning purple beneath his hands. His breathing quickened. Student Dr. Jacob Gallagher noticed first. He had a gentle way about him, kind eyes, soft voice. "Come with me," Jacob said. "We'll clean that up." In the side room, the smell of antiseptic hit Bear hard. The door closing behind him felt like a trap. Jacob reached for gauze. Bear saw Ray's shadow instead. He panicked. In one sudden movement, he grabbed Jacob from behind, muscle memory taking over. A wrestling tackle. Controlled, efficient, but devastating in a hospital corridor. Jacob hit the floor with a cry of pain. Security rushed in. Bear's chest heaved as they pulled him away, confusion flooding his face as reality snapped back into place. "What have I done?" he whispered. By the time Patty and Mandy arrived, the psychiatric team had been called. "He didn't mean to," Patty insisted, voice cracking. "He's not well." But Bear had already slipped away, vanished into the night. Now he walked along a dark road outside the hospital, traffic rushing past. Headlights flared against the damp tarmac. His injured hand throbbed, blood crusted against his skin. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he couldn't stay. Every time a car passed, he imagined stepping into its path, ending the noise in his head, ending the guilt. But something kept him moving, feet carrying him instinctively toward the village, toward unfinished business. Patty didn't sleep. He and Dylan searched through the night, fields, lay-bys, wooded paths. Mandy stayed home in case Bear returned. "He's not thinking straight," Dylan said, guilt etched across his face. Patty barely heard him. The phone rang just after dawn. D.S. Walsh. Her tone was firm, but not unkind. "Your father breached bail and assaulted a member of staff. When we find him, he'll be held on remand." Patty's stomach dropped. "He needs help," he said hoarsely. "Not prison." "That may be," she replied, "but he's a risk." As the morning mist lifted, Patty drove slowly past the cemetery. He didn't know why. Maybe instinct. Maybe hope. And then he saw him. Bear sat on the damp grass beside Anya Barisha's empty grave site, the place that had once symbolized grief, loss, and the long shadow of past tragedies. He sat hunched, shoulders bowed, staring at nothing. "Dad." The word came out as a breath. Bear looked up slowly. For a moment, Patty saw the fighter again. Then the mask fell away. "I'm tired, son," Bear said. "So tired." Patty knelt beside him. "You're coming home." "I ruin everything." "No. You were broken. There's a difference." Bear's voice cracked. "I killed a man. You were tortured. You snapped. And now you need proper help." Bear looked at the empty grave. Mal deserved better. Everyone does. Patty swallowed hard. "Then let's make sure you get better. That's how we honor that." Getting Bear into the car felt like coaxing a wounded animal. He didn't resist. He just seemed hollow. As Patty drove, his mind raced. He knew he had to inform D.S. Walsh. But if he did that now, Bear would be remanded immediately. Prison would destroy him. There had to be another way. Back home, Mandy wrapped Bear in a blanket and made tea he didn't drink. Patty stepped outside and called a private, secure mental health unit he'd researched in desperation months ago. It would cost more than he could comfortably afford. He didn't care. "He needs specialist trauma care," Patty said into the phone. "PTSD. Acute stress reaction. He's a danger to himself." There was a pause. If he's currently on bail and has reoffended, admission may require police cooperation. Of course it would. Nothing was simple. An hour later, D.S. Walsh arrived at the door. Patty met her outside. "I found him," he admitted. She nodded. "Where is he?" "Inside. But before you take him, hear me out." He laid out the plan. The private unit. The security. The psychiatric evaluation. The money he was willing to pay. Walsh listened carefully. He assaulted someone, Mr. Dingle. He panicked. He thought he was back there. "That may mitigate things," she said, "but the court will decide. If he goes to prison, he won't survive it." Walsh's gaze softened slightly. If a consultant psychiatrist confirms he requires immediate inpatient care, I can recommend remand to a secure hospital instead of prison. But it has to be legitimate. No shortcuts. Relief flooded Patty's chest. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Inside, Bear sat silently. When Walsh entered, he didn't look surprised. I'm not running, he said quietly. I know, she replied. The psychiatric assessment took hours. Bear answered questions honestly. About the farm. About Mal. About Ray. About the hospital. About the nights he wished he hadn't survived. The consultant's verdict was clear. Acute PTSD with dissociative episodes. High risk without structured care. Remand to a secure mental health unit was recommended. As the ambulance prepared to take him, Bear squeezed Patty's shoulder. I don't deserve this. Yes, you do, Patty insisted. You deserve a chance. Will it work? Patty didn't lie. I don't know, but we're not giving up. When the doors closed, Mandy slipped her hand into Patty's. You did the right thing, she said. Patty watched the vehicle disappear down the lane. He thought about secrets. About guilt. About how easily a man could break when pushed too far. Bear's road ahead would be long. There would be court dates. Media speculation. Laurel's grief. Jacob's recovery. Dylan's guilt. The truth about Ray's body still hanging over them all. But for the first time in months, Bear wasn't running. He was being held somewhere safe. And sometimes, survival wasn't about strength. Sometimes it was about allowing yourself to be helped. As dusk settled over the village once more, Patty whispered a promise into the cooling air. No more secrets. No more running. We fix this together. Somewhere behind locked doors and padded walls, Bear Wolf closed his eyes. The fight wasn't over. But maybe, just maybe, it had finally changed.